Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Psych Investor Summit Research and Development. My name is Victoria Decker, and I am Head of Growth for Psych. It's a real pleasure to see you all on the platform, and I'm really excited to share our programming with you today. Our team at Psych put this program together quite intentionally to provide you with what we consider to be some of the most promising and forward-looking psychedelic insights as told by some of the brightest minds in the industry today. So we've got a lot of fascinated speakers and interesting discussions in today's schedule, and we encourage all of you to explore the event platform Swap Card, engage with fellow attendees, and join in conversations with all of us in the chats. I'd also encourage everyone to follow Psych on social media, sign up to our industry-leading Psychedelics newsletter, and to download a copy of our Psychedelics as Medicine report. And on that, I am delighted to share that we are in deep development on the third edition of the report, which is powered by Blossom, the world's leading repository for analytics on the psychedelics space and psychedelics data. So we'll be sharing some preliminary data from the report at the summit later today, so stay tuned for that. And if your company may want to get involved in the report, we've got some great partnership opportunities, and we would be happy to chat through the day. So now that I have chatted for far too long, it is my great pleasure to introduce a man who really needs no introduction, Rick Doblin, founder of the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies, and our dear friend. Rick, it is great to have you back.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here with you today. Thanks for the invitation and the opportunity. I'm going to present where we are with our research. We're in phase 3, so we're the only company now that's in phase 3, and we've completed our first phase 3 study, and I'll give you a bit of the history and where we're going and what our timeline is. And when we talk about history, let's start with Stan Grof. It was 1972 when I first read his book, Realms of the Human Unconscious, Observations from LSD Research, and actually wrote him a letter and did a workshop with him in the summer of 72 when I was 18 years old, and that's when I decided to focus my life on psychedelics. On July 1 of this year, Stan turned 90. And what he said, which is so inspirational, is psychedelics are to the study of the mind what the microscope is to biology and the telescope is astronomy. And we know that quite a few centuries ago, the telescope was itself extremely controversial because of what people were able to see through the telescope, that the Earth wasn't the center of the universe, and that conflicted with some religious understandings. And actually, Father Bruno was burned at the stake because he refused to recant the view that the Earth was not the center of the universe. He said to the Inquisition, "Your fear in sentencing me is greater than my fear in being sentenced." But now the telescope is not controversial. And while psychedelics have been controversial, we hope that the mainstreaming of psychedelics will make it so that we understand that they're just tools and that we need to deal with what we learn from the psychedelics, and that they're incredible tools for healing, for spirituality, for personal growth. And so everything that I know and have done, I owe to Stan, and also to fantastic psychedelics. To give you a sense of where we are in the psychic renaissance, this is the Web of Science Psychedelic Publications. And if you look in around 1970, a little bit before and after there, this is the period of time where the research really peaked from the 50s and 60s. And that was, though, when the backlash began. And that was the Controlled Substances Act of 1970. And if you look, it took almost 30 years till 2000 for the number of publications to equal where they were in the 1970s. And since then, there's just been an explosion of research. And that's why I think it is correct to say that we are in a period of a renaissance of psychedelic research. Our corporate structure is this, that I started MAPS in 1986 as a nonprofit 501c3 psychedelic pharmaceutical company. Luckily, I didn't know that no drug had ever been made into a medicine by a nonprofit. That didn't happen until 1999, and that was the abortion pill, RU46, which was quite controversial and abandoned by the pharmaceutical industry. So MAPS is a nonprofit, but I learned in 2013 that there are policies to provide incentives for developing drugs that are off patent, and that will permit us to sell MDMA for a profit if we do end up getting approved by regulatory agencies. And so in December of 2014, we created the MAPS Public Benefit Corporation. So it is for profit. It's 100% owned by the nonprofit. It's a modification of capitalism where you maximize public benefit, not profit. And the Public Benefit Corporation, we hope, will get permission, will sell MDMA for PTSD and potentially other indications. And then whatever money is made will be rerouted back to the nonprofit, which will then put more in research, put more in our public education work, our harm reduction work. And so we call this the virtuous cycle. And we also have now created MAPS Deutschland, MAPS Canada, MAPS Israel as nonprofit organizations in those countries for donors to give tax-deductible donations for the work, and then it can be used all over the world. So this is our corporate structure. We have about 120 people, growing fast, and around 2/3 of them are in the Benefit Corp, which we call them, led by our refugees from Big Science, from Big Pharma, and around 1/3 of the people are in our nonprofit, where we do the policy and advocacy, the public education, the fundraising, the development, the harm reduction. It was Ronald Reagan who signed into law the Drug Price Competition and Patent Term Restoration Act of '84 that provided data exclusivity. And this is an important alternative to patents. What it means is that no one, if you're the first one to make a drug into a medicine that's never been made before, and there are no patents, that you get data exclusivity, which means you are the only one that you can use your data to, and it blocks a generic competitor for, in the US, 5 years. And if you do pediatric studies, which the FDA has required us to do, if we succeed in adults, then you end up getting an extra 6 months. And it blocks a generic competitor from even applying to the FDA for 5 till that period of time is over. And then there's around 6 months or so it'll take FDA to evaluate whether the generic competitor drug is really, as pure, as stable as our drug. And in Europe, it's 10 years. And the main difference from data exclusivity to patents is that other companies, if they wanted to, can create their own data and then market MDMA for PTSD. I think that's not likely to happen. What's going to happen is that other companies will try to develop MDMA-like drugs that then they can patent and try to see if they have certain advantages over MDMA, which, if it happens, we would welcome that, because we're really about patient outcomes and maximizing patient outcomes. But data exclusivity gives us this opportunity to tell donors that we're not going to forever be coming to you for donations. We will eventually be able to be sustainable through the sale of MDMA by a profit, which we think will happen in summer of 2024, where we reach sustainability. Since founded MAP in '86, we've raised over 110 million in donations. That sounds incredible. It's really great. But the for-profit industry over the last couple of years has raised well over $1 billion. And so that is the main advantage for for-profit companies, is the access to capital. MDMA was first invented by Merck in 1912. They weren't looking for it. They were looking to evade a competitor's patent on getting to a different drug, and they patented everything along the way. They did nothing with it for 15 years and then tested it in animals and found nothing interesting. They missed the whole pro-social aspect of it. In 53, 54, the U.S. Army Chemical Warfare Service was looking at the toxicity of drugs similar to MDMA. There was 8 drugs, methamphetamine on one side, mescaline on the other, MDMA in the middle. And as far as we know, they didn't do anything in humans, and the results were classified until 1973. Merck in 59 again tried to do more animal studies, again found nothing interesting and completely abandoned it. And MDMA was kind of rediscovered in the 70s after the Controlled Substances Act of 1970. And that was where chemicals had to be specifically named to be illegal. And so Sasha Shulgin was sort of the US equivalent of Albert Hoffman, and he has invented hundreds of psychedelic substances, and he rediscovered MDMA and experimented on it himself and thought it was very valuable, and then handed it off to Leo Zeff, the secret chief, who was the leader of the underground psychedelic psychotherapy movement. He was a clinical psychology Ph.D., and he introduced MDMA into therapy, known as Adam as the code name. And around 500,000 doses were made during this period of time until the early 80s, when some of the people that experienced it in this way decided that more people should have it, they could make a lot of money off of it, and they turned it into ecstasy. As a side note, much of this MDMA was made at night in the MIT laboratories. MDMA became ecstasy, particularly in Dallas at the Start Club. That's what attracted the attention of the DEA. And this was during Nancy Reagan, Ronald Reagan escalation of the drug war. So criminalization was inevitable. I started a nonprofit before MAPS to try to protect MDMA's therapeutic use. We had a series of meetings at Esalen and sort of gathered together the psychedelic psychotherapy community. And in the summer of '84, the DEA did move to criminalize MDMA. And this is a picture of me right before I walk into the DEA headquarters within the 30-day public comment period to ask for a hearing on whether MDMA could stay as a medicine. And we actually were winning in the court of public opinion with the media. We had monks and rabbis and psychiatrists from Harvard and elsewhere talking about the value of MDMA. And we were winning in the court. We did get this hearing, and that freaked out the DEA. And so they emergency scheduled MDMA in '85. The irony here is that Gene Hayslip here jumped the gun, and the original criminalization of MDMA was illegal. They did not have the authority to do so. A bunch of people that got arrested had to be let go. Later, we won the hearing. The judge said it should be Schedule 3, but the DEA overruled the judge. They did not accept the recommendation, and we won a couple times in the appeals court. The third time, the DEA lawyers figured out how to satisfy the appeals court. So we knew that we needed to bring it back, and the only way was really through science, through medicine, through treating patients, through the FDA. So in '86 is when I started MAPS. Now, we had 5 different protocols rejected by the FDA, and in 1990, a new group at the FDA took over to regulate psychedelics, the pilot drug evaluation staff. And they approved Rick Strassman to do DMT research in 1990. And they ended up in '92, had a meeting to decide whether to open the door to psychedelic research. And they had a FDA advisory committee meeting. National Institute on Drug Abuse had a 2-day meeting of their animal researchers. And they decided to open the door to psychedelic research. And they approved our phase 1 dose response safety study, which was done by Charlie Grobe at Harbor UCLA. And that moved through the '90s. And then in 2000, we started research in Spain for MDMA for PTSD. But unfortunately, we got really good PR, but that alerted the Madrid Anti-Drug Authority, and they shut down the study for political reasons. The National Institute on Drug Abuse sent some of their researchers to Spain to try to scare people about supposed neurotoxicity, which got in the way of, so positive research gets in the way of the drug war narrative that these drugs are all bad. And this was heartbreaking. But in 2000, I also started working with Michael Mithoefer, our lead psychiatrist in the US, to do research with PTSD in the United States. We had FDA approval, but institutional review boards, 7 of them rejected our protocol, even though we had FDA approval. And then out of desperation, I went to one final one, which was called Copernicus. And I figured, again, if any IRB would be sympathetic to religious political pressure against science, it would be the Copernicus group. And as it turned out, they were the ones that really approved the study, and that got us started. And that got us started on phase 2. And so it took us 30 years from the start of MAPS to the end of phase 2 meeting at FDA. This is our mighty team of 5 people. Pharma will have lots more, but we just had 5 people, and it was sufficient to get approval to move to phase 3. We presented information from 6 different phase 2 studies in the United States, Switzerland, Canada, and Israel with over 105 people. And we tested various doses, various comparator doses. What we found is that the most effective dose range was 75 to 125 milligrams. So basically, phase 2 is to help you design phase 3. Because of neurotoxicity concerns, we did do neurocognitive tests before and after, and you can see here that we showed no difference between the groups. Now we don't even have to do anything about neurotoxicity, and the concerns about neurotoxicity have basically faded, and we've now got toxicity data to show there is no neurotoxicity at the doses we use. So this is what we learned in phase 2. In phase 2, we worked with, on average, severe chronic treatment-resistant PTSD, and we enroll people that previously attempted suicide. We need to work with the hardest group, and we have a lot of therapy surrounding 3 MDMA sessions. And in the placebo group, 23% at the 2-month follow-up no longer had PTSD, which is remarkable. So we have an effective therapy, and this is more or less in the range of what therapy does for these kind of patients, chronic, severe, treatment-resistant patients. But when you add MDMA, we had 56% no longer had PTSD. And this is at the 2-month follow-up. But what's even more important, particularly for insurance companies, for commercialization, is, are these durable effects? Because if they're not, this is labor-intensive. It's more expensive than just giving somebody a pill. But does it last? So at our 12-month follow-up, we showed that people kept getting better. 2/3 of the people no longer had PTSD. So this was tremendous. This was the results that we presented to FDA at our end of phase 2 meeting. We learned also that the cause of PTSD is irrelevant. We can enroll people with PTSD from any cause. The SSRIs work better in women than in men and failed in combat-related PTSD. We learned that low doses of MDMA do help blinding. People are confused between low doses and full doses, but they had an anti-therapeutic effect. And what we mean is it made people uncomfortable, that people did better if they had therapy with no MDMA than if they had therapy with low-dose MDMA. So we can get blinding, but if we would have used low-dose MDMA, it would make it easier for us to find the difference between the group that gets therapy, the group that gets therapy with full-dose MDMA. We established safety in clinical settings. None of the concerns that you hear about people overdosing, hyperthermia, dying in raves, or drinking too much water, dying from hyponatremia, none of that happens in our clinical research, and we had medium to large effect size. So this was all very encouraging. You may have heard that in the research in the 50s and 60s with LSD and psilocybin, and in the current research for the last 20 years, that there's a correlation between the depth of the mystical experience and therapeutic outcome for psilocybin and LSD for the classic psychedelics. And we use the same questionnaire. 0.6 is considered to be a full mystical experience. And you see that people do pretty close to that even with MDMA. They do have more of these, quote, mystical experiences with the classic psychedelics. But what we showed is that there is no correlation between the mystical experience and therapeutic outcome when it comes to MDMA for PTSD. For psilocybin for PTSD, maybe there would be that correlation. But in our therapeutic approach, we don't try to steer people to a mystical experience. We sort of support them in whatever's emerging. Based on all this data, we got permission to go to phase 3, and we negotiated phase 3 for another 8 months, basically, and got approval in the special protocol assessment process, which was very important because the FDA now, we have a legal agreement with a approval letter that FDA can no longer challenge the methodology of our studies because we came to an agreement on them. And after that, this is the protocol that we got approval for in phase 3, that it will be inactive placebo. So people are screened and enrolled. There's a total of 12 90-minute non-drug psychotherapy sessions and 3 MDMA sessions 1 month apart, actually 3 to 5 weeks. And you either get the upper track or the lower track. So everybody gets the same therapy, the same 8-hour sessions, the same male-female co-therapy team. The first MDMA session is with 80 milligrams, and we do follow that 2 hours later with a supplemental dose of 40 milligrams. And around 95% of the people go up in the second session to 120 milligrams, followed by 60. But there's a bit of a negotiation. And for the third session, too, it's also optional. But this is our phase 3 design, and the 2-month follow-up is the primary outcome measure. As I mentioned, the 12-month follow-up is for insurance companies. And we were able to get breakthrough therapy designation, and this is for the most important drugs that the FDA thinks could be breakthroughs in their category. We are doing phase 3 in Israel, Canada, and the United States. There's around 9.5 million people with PTSD in these countries. And the FDA is willing to take foreign data from Israel and Canada. And this means that we will likely get, if our second phase 3 study is as good as our first, or even as close to as good, we'll get approval initially in these 3 countries to move to commercialization. We did also move to the European Medicines Agency. This was our 6-person team there. George Goldsmith on the left is the founder of Compass Pathways. He was assisting us. So we got permission from the European Medicines Agency to move to phase 3 in Europe, and they requested we enroll refugees and migrants in our study, which we are going to do. And we have now started training therapists in Europe. We'll have 9 sites in 6 countries. These are where we're going to be going to in Europe. We just treated the first person in the Czech Republic. We treated people in the Netherlands. And so we're moving forward here. We think Europe will be about a year behind the US. And if we have FDA and EMA approval, most countries of the world will approve MDMA as well without additional research. This is going to be, with the exception of Russia, China, and Japan. So our phase 3 results are this. We have to do 2 100-person studies. The first study is completed, and due to COVID, we had to slow it down, and we negotiated with FDA that we could end it with 90 people. That's a little bit nerve-wracking because, the fewer people you have, the harder it is to get statistical significance. But we felt that at the time it was going to be difficult because of COVID to get the other 10. So, and we now are in the midst of maybe the 25% done through our second phase 3 study. We had, again, the hardest cases. People had PTSD for an average of 14 years or so. 1/3 of our people had PTSD for over 20 years. The veterans get a lot of the attention, but most of the people with PTSD are women. You could see that fully a third of the people had PTSD from sexual assault or sexual trauma. We also had domestic violence, armed or unarmed assault, combat exposure. It's a U.S. tragedy. We had several people from mass shootings at schools, and roughly 2/3 are women, 1/3 are men. And 1/3 of these people, their PTSD, their primary trauma occurred in childhood, so it's complex PTSD. On the right-hand side, positive behavior, you see around 1/3 of the people had either prepared for or actually attempted to commit suicide, and over 90% had thoughts of suicide, and well over 1/3 had serious suicidal ideation, more or less similar in the MDMA and in the placebo group. This is just a graphic representation of our results, and what you can see here is just that the upper line is therapy without MDMA, the lower line is therapy with MDMA, and you could see that the distance between the 2 groups grows after each MDMA session. So our model, as I said, is 3 MDMA sessions, and then for most people that will be it. A fair number of people will only need 2 sessions. Occasionally some people will need 1, some people may need 4. And the results that we got in this phase 3 study were even better than in phase 2. So in our control group, 32% no longer had PTSD compared to 23%. 67% at the 2-month follow-up no longer had PTSD, compared to 56% in phase 2. And we don't have the 12-month follow-up data, but we anticipate that the results will, if they track phase 2, people will continue to get better. And so hopefully at the 1-year follow-up, more than 2/3 will no longer have PTSD. Now, this is obviously remarkable. And of the 1/3 that still has PTSD, most of them had clinically significant reduction of PTSD symptoms. So there was only around 10% of people that are non-responders. And the dissociative subtype is considered to be the hardest group to treat. Dissociation is the common strategy when you are traumatized. You just pretend you're not there, but then it's hard to get back into your memories, into your body, into your emotions. And the extreme is called dissociative identity disorder, split personality. Those people we exclude, not because we can't help them, but because they might need more than 3 sessions. So we showed that this works better in the hardest cases. And in terms of statistical significance, 0.5, 1 in 2 chance that it's not more effective than placebo, that's not statistically significant. 0.05 means 1 in 20 chance that the difference is due to random factors than to your treatment. That is what's called statistically significant. That's the minimum required for FDA. There's another level, which is 1 in 1,000, that's considered very persuasive, robust. And there are some circumstances where FDA will approve a drug on the basis of one very persuasive, robust phase 3 study. In our case, I don't think they'll do that because of the controversy of MDMA. But what we actually got was P equals 0.0001, 1 in 10,000 chance that the differences were due to random factors. So it's highly, highly statistically significant. The effect size is a measure of the effect. Effect size of 1 means 1 standard deviation from the norm. And the FDA will approve drugs on the basis of statistical significance, but the effect size, you can see for Zoloft and Paxil, is some of the studies failed. It's small or just barely into medium. But our effect size, and we've got 2 different ones. One is called placebo subtracted. That's the normal way where you subtract the placebo group from your treatment group. But in our case, the placebo group is therapy. They're not just inactive placebo. So our 0.91, which is a large effect size, tremendous, is really just of the MDMA alone, but it's 2.1 when you combine MDMA plus therapy. And that's in the within subjects group that got both. And in practice, in treatment, it will be therapy plus MDMA. So extremely large effect size. The results were evenly distributed across sites, so it's not just highly trained therapists that are doing it at a few sites. And this is because, in part because we could say our training program, but it's even more because the incredible therapeutic potential of MDMA. In terms of safety, we had more suicidality in the placebo group than in the MDMA group. And we had one person tried to kill herself during the study twice. Fortunately, didn't succeed. Another person checked herself into a hospital to avoid killing herself. Both were in the placebo group. We had no suicide attempts or serious ideation in that way in the MDMA group. And there were no cardiovascular problems. There was one concern in the placebo group and no abuse potential. People did go on to use it afterwards. The side effects were minor. These are acute during the MDMA, muscle tightness, sweating. So in summary, a very small p-value, large effect size, replicated phase 2 results, no site-to-site variability, and a great safety profile. And so we think that we're on the way to approval. We've had a cost-effectiveness study that was very cost-effective, so we think we'll be able to get it covered by insurance. This is Elliot Marseille. Now, this is just from the phase 2 data, and he's redone this for the phase 3 data. And our public benefit model means that we maximize therapeutic outcomes. We're not focused on maximizing profit. We're sharing all our findings. We are using data exclusivity, but we don't need IP protection. We create an ethical practice to serve as a model for for-profit. We're supportive of for-profit organizations. The scale of the need is so great that we need everybody, profit, nonprofit. We're supportive of even patenting, but we're concerned about overbroad patents. We're involved in drug policy reform. We do think that some for-profits are worried that drug legalization will be harmful to the business model of for-profits. I think that's a misunderstanding. I think even if people can buy these drugs on their own, we'll train them in peer support. People will do this, a lot of self-medication. I think it will increase support by the number of people that want to go to trained professionals in clinics supported by insurance. We do this harm reduction and peer support to kind of make the legalization, decrim efforts work out. We support personal growth and spiritual growth, so it's not just for people with indications, and we are working with conflict couples therapy, but also cultures. We have an Israeli-Palestinian project with Israelis and Palestinians doing MDMA and ayahuasca together. We're also looking at trying to build work inside the VA. We're just about to start inside the Loma Linda VA. Rachel Yehuda is going to start inside the Bronx VA, comparing 2 MDMA sessions versus 3 MDMA sessions. We're working on a group therapy study. This will be both to reduce costs and maybe it'll be better. This will be in the Portland VA. And all of these are funded by philanthropy. We've not yet been able to get the VA to spend money. We've been working since 1990 on the VA. But finally, things are turning around after 31 years. The VA, federal government changes the last. We're also saying we don't necessarily know the one right treatment. We're working with Candace Monson. This was our first VA-affiliated therapist with cognitive behavioral conjoint therapy. Conjoint means couples or dyads. And she's developed this without MDMA. But when we blended MDMA, both members of the couple get MDMA, and it's a way for us to sort of backdoor into couples therapy. And the results were better than anything without MDMA. Another approach, cognitive processing therapy. Ann Wagner is protege of Candace Monson, so we're paying for her to blend MDMA with cognitive processing therapy. Prolonged exposure is the main approach used in the VA, so we're blending MDMA with prolonged exposure with Barbara Rothbaum at Emory and at the Atlanta VA. And Edna Foa, who developed prolonged exposure, is going to work with us on a project in Israel for blending MDMA with prolonged exposure. And this is really to educate the VA-affiliated therapists and the PTSD treatment community. But maybe some of these blends will work effective for certain people. And so we're agnostic about what's the best, although we do have our own treatment manual. This is going to be the first study at Yale, the first study ever where somebody under the influence of MDMA with PTSD goes in a scanner and we'll look at amygdala activation. This is independently funded. It's a investigator-initiated trial where we supply the MDMA and we train the therapists, but they are in charge of the study. In terms of outcomes, our May in 2022 is when we're going to have the interim analysis for the second phase 3 study. And we will learn if we just continue the study unchanged, don't need to add anybody. If it's not as effective as we thought, we may have to add subjects. And the worst is they tell you to stop the study for utility, but we don't think that's going to happen. This is our big complicated timeline, and there's all these different components to getting the drug approved. But rather than go through all of it, what I just want to say is that we anticipate that we will have approval from FDA, we think, by Q3 of 2023, and we think that DEA rescheduling has to happen 90 days after that. October 2022 is when we think we'll finish the second phase 3 study. And so these are, of course, we're trying to do better than this, but these are our current estimates. And this is our hope here, is that in the period of data exclusivity in the United States, we're hoping to have 1 million MDMA sessions with roughly 500,000 patients, an average of 2 sessions per patient. And then the bottom line here is the number of therapists that we're planning to train in terms of thousands. And so what we're thinking we're going to need to do is train somewhere in the neighborhood of 25,000 therapists. And these are therapists also that are going to want to be cross-trained in MDMA and psilocybin and ketamine. And so we think that that's the way that this is going to go. And that we hope in the first 10 years, when we add in Europe and all, we'll be treating 1 million people with PTSD. And I'm not showing you our economic projections here or the price. We're still trying to work that out, but we think that there's substantial income that we can make that will then be recycled for other research and public education. So that is roughly where we're at. I'll just say that the main thing is that I'm extremely optimistic about how this will move forward. And I think that MAPS will be probably approval in the US, then 1 year later in Europe, and then psilocybin will come online. And we just look forward to working with everybody to try to advance this field.
Thank you so much for sharing all of that with us. It's fascinating work that your team is doing, and from our perspective, and I know that this is one shared by many, MAPS phase 3 results are, without question, one of the highest points of psychedelic clinical research in 2021. So we'll be following along as your group continues your important work around collective mental healing for the years to come. So we're very glad to have you here, and we couldn't think of a better way to kick off the summit. So thank you.
Great. Thank you, Victoria.